The crack in the foundation. John Carter had always been a man of quiet strength. At 68 years old, he carried himself with the grace of someone who had endured life's battles, both seen and unseen. His military service had left him with more than just a few scars. It had given him a deep sense of purpose, an unyielding loyalty to his country, and a belief that people could change. But as he pulled into the parking lot of Tom's Diner that bright autumn afternoon, he couldn't have anticipated how quickly the world he thought he knew would unravel. The diner had always been a staple of the small southern town of Pinecrest. Its whitewashed walls and old-fashioned neon sign gave it the appearance of a place untouched by time. For years, John had been coming to Tom's Diner for a cup of coffee and a slice of apple pie. It was a simple ritual that connected him to the days of his youth, to moments when life seemed easier and the future less uncertain. John eased out of his truck, his knees aching as they often did these days. The warm sun felt good on his weathered face, but something else weighed heavy on him, an unease he couldn't quite place. As he approached the glass door of the diner, the usual jingle of bells above the door greeted him. He smiled, a comforting habit, but that smile faded as he noticed the odd looks from the patrons inside. Conversations that had once filled the air with the lively hum of a small-town diner fell into an uncomfortable silence. John paused for a moment. He had never felt unwelcome in Pinecrest before. Sure, there were times in the past when tensions had run high, times when his skin color seemed to set him apart. But Pinecrest was his home. He had fought in Vietnam for this country, for this town, and had always been met with a level of respect that made him feel like those old days of prejudice were behind them. Today, however, something was different. He made his way to the counter, where Tom Harris, the diner's owner, was polishing glasses with a look of steely determination on his face. The usual warmth in Tom's demeanor was nowhere to be found. Instead, his eyes held a coldness that sent a chill down John's spine. "Afternoon, Tom," John said, trying to keep his voice light. Tom barely acknowledged him, his movements stiff and unwelcoming. John shifted uncomfortably in his seat, glancing at the empty space around him. No one else seemed eager to make eye contact. The small crowd of locals, people he had known for years, seemed to be waiting for something, but John couldn't yet tell what. "Just the usual for me," John said, his voice faltering slightly. "Cup of coffee and a slice of that famous apple pie." Tom's hand paused midwife, as if the request had suddenly become an inconvenience. His jaw tightened, and when he finally spoke, his voice was sharp and lacking the friendliness John had come to expect. "We're out of pie today." John blinked, taken aback. From where he was sitting, he could see the unmistakable golden crust of a fresh apple pie cooling on the counter just a few feet away. "But I can see. I said we're out." Tom's voice was louder now, hard and unyielding. The air in the diner shifted. The other patrons, who had been pretending not to listen, exchanged nervous glances. A young couple at a nearby table stiffened, their conversation halting mid-sentence. John felt his chest tighten, not with anger, but with confusion and disbelief. This was Tom, the man he had shared countless conversations with over the years, the man who had always made him feel welcome. I don't understand," John stammered, his hands trembling slightly as he rested them on the counter. "Have I done something to upset you?" Tom set down the glass he had been wiping, his eyes hard and unfeeling. "You've done enough just by walking in here. I don't serve your kind anymore, John. It's time for you to leave." The words hit John like a punch to the gut. He stood there, frozen, as a flood of emotions washed over him. Disbelief, hurt, and a bitter sense of déjà vu from a time when such treatment had been commonplace in his youth. The diner seemed to spin around him, his heartbeat echoing in his ears as the weight of what Tom had just said settled in. John had been treated with disdain before, especially in his younger days, but never here. Not in Pinecrest. Not by Tom. Without another word, John slowly pushed himself off the stool, his legs feeling heavier than before. The whispers from the other patrons followed him as he made his way toward the door, each step more painful than the last. He could feel the eyes of everyone in the diner on him, burning into his back, as if waiting to see if he would react, if he would confront Tom and cause a scene. He didn't. That wasn't John's way. The bell above the door jingled once more as John stepped out into the fading sunlight. The warmth he had felt earlier seemed distant now, replaced by a chill that settled deep in his bones. His body ached, not from age or old war wounds, but from the fresh sting of humiliation. As he reached his truck, John hesitated, his hand resting on the door handle. For a moment, he thought about turning back, about confronting Tom, demanding an explanation. But what good would that do? Tom had made it clear that John wasn't welcome there anymore. And for what? Because of the color of his skin. In all these years, had Tom really harbored such deep-seated hatred? John slid into the driver's seat, the familiar creak of the leather barely registering in his mind. His hand shook as he gripped the steering wheel, staring out at the quiet street ahead of him. Pennicrest had always felt like home, but now it seemed foreign, like a place he no longer belonged. The question that gnawed at him wasn't just why Tom had done it, but what had changed. As he sat there in silence, lost in thought, a slow realization began to settle over him. He may have been thrown out of Tom's diner, but this wasn't the end of the story. No, this was just the beginning. John Carter was not a man to take injustice lying down. And while he didn't yet know what he would do, one thing was certain. Tom Harris had made a grave mistake, and the consequences were far from over. Unbeknownst to Tom, this act of prejudice had set off a chain reaction that would soon shake the very core of their small town. And someone far more powerful than Tom realized was about to take notice. Unraveling ties. The next day dawned bright and crisp, the sun spilling its golden rays across the small southern town. But there was a palpable tension in the air, a sense of anticipation that hung over everything like a thick fog. John Carter sat at his kitchen table, a steaming cup of coffee in hand, staring out the window at the familiar sights of his neighborhood. The early morning joggers passed by. The sound of children's laughter drifted from a nearby school. Yet today felt different. Today, he knew, would be a turning point. As the day wore on, John's mind was a whirlwind of emotions. The sting of humiliation from Tom Harris' diner lingered, but underneath it all, a fire was igniting within him. He couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just about him. It was a broader issue of prejudice that had festered in their community for far too long. With a deep breath, he pushed back from the table, determination etched on his weathered face. He had served his country, fought for its values of freedom and equality. And now, it was time to stand up for himself and others who had suffered from discrimination. Meanwhile, at Tom's diner, the atmosphere was one of gloom. Tom Harris stood behind the counter, his face set in a grim line. The usual chatter that filled the diner was replaced with an uncomfortable silence. Regular patrons shuffled in and out, their faces averted as they avoided eye contact with him. It was as if the air had thickened, wrapping around Tom like a suffocating blanket. He felt the weight of judgment on his shoulders, a heavy burden he had never anticipated bearing. As he poured coffee, Tom's mind raced with thoughts of the previous day's encounter. Michael Carter's visit had shaken him to his core. He had always prided himself on running a successful diner, one that had been a staple of the community for generations. But now, everything felt precarious, as if the very ground he stood on could crumble beneath him. The offer to buy the diner was still tucked away in his pocket, a stark reminder of his predicament. What if he sold the diner? The thought sent a chill down his spine. He had always envisioned handing it down to his children, continuing the legacy of his family. But how could he maintain that legacy in a town that had suddenly turned its back on him? The shame of his actions loomed over him like a dark cloud, and as he glanced around at the empty booths, he knew he was losing the very community he had tried to uphold. Just then, Sarah, his longtime waitress, stepped behind the counter, her eyes filled with concern. "Tom," she said softly. "Can we talk?" Tom turned to her, his jaw tightening. He didn't want to hear any lectures about what he had done. "I'm busy, Sarah," he snapped, but his heart wasn't in it. "Please, Tom, I just want to help," she insisted, her voice steady but gentle. With a heavy sigh, Tom nodded, signaling her to continue. They moved to a quieter corner of the diner, the remnants of lunch scattered around them like unspoken words. "Everyone is talking, Tom. People are hurt," Sarah said, her eyes searching his face for understanding. "What you did to Mr. Carter, it's not just about him. It's about everyone in this community who has felt that kind of rejection." Tom's anger flared momentarily. "I don't need a lesson in morality from you, Sarah. I made my choice, and I stand by it. Is that really how you feel?" She pressed, her voice steady. "Or is it what you think you're supposed to feel? You have a choice now. You can either double down on your beliefs or take a hard look at yourself and your actions." The words hit Tom harder than he expected. He looked away, ashamed to meet her gaze. "You don't understand," he mumbled, the fight leaving his voice. "This is how I was raised. This is what my father taught me." "Maybe it's time to question what you were taught," Sarah replied gently. "Your father isn't here to defend his beliefs anymore, Tom. You're the one who has to live with your choices now." Tom felt a wave of frustration wash over him. The weight of Sarah's words clashed with his ingrained beliefs, forcing him to confront the uncomfortable truth that perhaps he had been wrong. "I'll think about it," he said finally, his voice quieter. As Sarah returned to her duties, Tom stood alone, lost in thought. He glanced at the diner's walls adorned with photos of smiling families and cheerful gatherings. Each frame told a story of the community he had built, and yet now he felt more isolated than ever. Meanwhile, across town, Michael Carter was mobilizing his allies. He sat in a conference room with a group of passionate community leaders, all of whom had been stirred to action by the events at Tom's diner. The atmosphere was charged with determination as Michael laid out his plan. "Tom's diner needs to be a turning point for our community," he asserted, his voice strong and confident. "This isn't just about my father. This is about everyone who has faced discrimination. We have to come together and show that we won't tolerate bigotry in our town." One of the leaders, a middle-aged woman named Ruth, nodded vigorously. "We need to organize a rally, bring attention to what happened. We can't let this slide." "Exactly," Michael replied. "But I want to go further. I propose that we buy Tom's diner and transform it into a community center, a place that symbolizes unity and acceptance." Gasps echoed around the room, followed by murmurs of agreement. "That's a bold move," Ruth said, her brow raised. "Do you think Tom would sell?" Michael shrugged. "If we can show him that he has the power to change, he might just reconsider. This is about more than just the diner. It's about reclaiming our narrative and fostering an environment where everyone feels welcome." As the meeting continued, ideas flowed like wildfire. They discussed ways to gather support from the community, how to finance the purchase, and strategies for spreading their message far and wide. Excitement bubbled in the air, fueling their desire to create real change. Back at Tom's diner, the evening crowd was sparse. As Tom wiped down the counter, he glanced out the window and spotted a small group gathering outside. Curiosity piqued. He stepped outside to get a closer look. The group was holding signs that read, "No to racism," and "Equality for all." His heart raced as he recognized some of the faces. These were people he had served for years, friends who had once shared laughter and meals within his establishment. Now they stood united against him, their expressions filled with disappointment and anger. "Tom," one of them shouted, drawing the attention of the others. "We need to talk." He hesitated, a wave of shame washing over him, but something inside urged him to step forward. "What do you want?" he called out, trying to mask the tremor in his voice. "An apology," another voice chimed in. "You can't treat people like that. Not in our town." Tom felt cornered, his heart pounding. The weight of his actions pressed down on him, and for the first time, He realized that this was not just about him. It was about everyone he had hurt. I made a mistake, he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. But I'm not sure how to fix it. A woman stepped forward, her eyes fierce but filled with compassion. You can start by recognizing the hurt you caused. We need to hear you say it. Tom swallowed hard, grappling with his pride. I'm sorry, he managed, his voice shaking. I'm sorry for what I did to Mr. Carter. It was wrong. The group murmured among themselves, some nodding while others looked skeptical. Tom could feel their collective gaze piercing through him, and he knew that his journey towards redemption had only just begun. As the night deepened, Tom returned inside the diner, his heart heavy but resolute. He had taken the first step, but he knew there was a long road ahead. What would it take to earn back the trust of his community? What would it mean to truly change? Meanwhile, Michael was busy spreading the word about their rally. He used his connections to ensure the event would attract as much attention as possible. He wanted the town to understand that this wasn't just about a diner. It was about challenging the very foundation of prejudice that had plagued their community for generations. As preparations ramped up, a sense of hope began to stir in John Carter's heart as well. He felt a connection to something larger than himself, a chance to stand up for what was right. He gathered his thoughts, thinking of the many veterans he had served with, those who had fought for freedom and equality alongside him. The events of the past few days had stirred something within him, awakening a desire to make a difference. Little did they all know, the upcoming rally would be the catalyst that would forever alter the course of their small town and challenge the deeply rooted beliefs that had long gone unquestioned. The stage was set, and the unfolding drama promised to reveal not just the strength of the community, but the capacity for growth, understanding, and ultimately, healing. In the days to come, hearts would be challenged, minds would be opened, and a path towards reconciliation would begin to take shape, illuminating the shadows of prejudice that had lingered for too long. The rally and reckoning. The day of the rally arrived, bright and filled with a hopeful energy that hummed through the town like a steady heartbeat. Colorful banners flapped in the cool breeze, and the sounds of excited chatter filled the air as families and friends gathered in the town square. The sun glinted off faces marked with determination and purpose. For many, this was not just a rally. It was a moment of truth, a chance to redefine their community. John Carter stood among the crowd, his heart pounding in his chest as he scanned the faces around him. He spotted his father, Michael, at the front, speaking passionately into a microphone. The rally was meant to be a call for unity and acceptance, but it had also become a platform for deep-seated frustrations to be aired. The previous days had brought whispers and rumors, and tensions simmered just beneath the surface. Today, we come together not just to remember what happened, but to envision a future where discrimination has no place in our lives. Michael proclaimed, his voice resonating with conviction. The crowd erupted into cheers, but John could see a mix of emotions flickering across the faces of those gathered. Hope, anger, fear, and uncertainty intertwined like the colors of the banners. As the speeches continued, John felt a surge of pride mixed with anxiety. This was his father leading the charge, standing up for a cause that could change everything. Yet he couldn't shake the feeling that their path would not be easy. The town had its entrenched beliefs, and change often came at a high price. Across the square, Tom Harris stood at the edge of the crowd, his hands stuffed deep in his pockets, his heart heavy with regret. The din of voices and chants echoed around him, a stark reminder of the turmoil he had caused. He had arrived at the rally uncertain of what to expect, his instincts pushing him to flee, yet something held him there, a desperate need for redemption. He listened intently as Michael spoke, the words cutting through his haze of shame. We can't let fear dictate our actions. We must choose understanding over ignorance. We have to stand against bigotry in all its forms, not just for ourselves, but for the generations that will follow. Tom's heart raced as he considered the impact of those words. He was beginning to realize that standing on the sidelines was no longer an option. He had to confront his own biases and the consequences of his actions. But how? As Michael continued to speak, Tom felt an unexpected surge of courage. He had come to the rally intending to listen, but he now understood that he had a responsibility to speak up, to acknowledge his wrongs and embrace the opportunity for change. He took a deep breath, his mind racing with thoughts of how to approach the community he had alienated. At the same time, tension was palpable within the crowd. As more speakers took the stage, some voices rose above the rest, expressing anger and frustration towards Tom and others who had perpetuated the divide. John observed a group of protesters who had come to counter the rally, holding signs that read, "Keep our town traditional," and "Don't change for anyone." Their presence was a stark reminder of the opposition that still existed, a microcosm of the broader societal struggles they faced. The opposing group, consisting mainly of those who shared Tom's previous beliefs, began to shout insults and derogatory phrases. "You're ruining our town," one shouted, and another added, "This isn't how we do things." The atmosphere grew charged, a palpable tension crackling in the air. John felt a knot form in his stomach, worried that the rally could spiral into chaos. He could see the resolve in Michael's eyes as he addressed the dissenters, urging calm and reminding everyone that this was a space for dialogue, not division. "Let's not lose sight of why we're here," Michael called out. "This is about building bridges, not walls." The opposing group quieted momentarily, but their hostility simmered just below the surface. John watched, heart racing, as a few individuals from the counter-protest began to make their way toward the stage, shouting accusations and stirring up anger among their supporters. Just as things seemed to be on the verge of boiling over, a familiar face stepped forward. Ruth, the community leader who had supported Michael's plans. She stepped into the fray, raising her hands in a gesture of peace. "Let's talk, not fight," she shouted, her voice cutting through the tension like a knife. "We're all neighbors here. We all want what's best for our families. But that can't come at the expense of others." Tom watched her intently, feeling a flicker of hope in the chaos. Ruth's words resonated, echoing his own thoughts. He stepped forward, his heart pounding, feeling as though he were crossing an invisible line. "Maybe I can help," he said, his voice shaking but resolute. "I'm Tom Harris, and I own the diner. I made a mistake, and I see now how my actions hurt people. I want to make it right." The crowd fell silent, their attention shifting toward him. A mix of disbelief and curiosity washed over the faces before him. "Tom," one of the protesters shouted, disbelief etched on their face. "What are you doing here?" "I'm here to apologize," he said, voice steadying with every word. "I spent too long hiding behind my beliefs, not recognizing the pain I caused. I want to change, to learn. I want my diner to be a place where everyone feels welcome, regardless of who they are." Gasps echoed through the crowd, and Tom felt his heart race as he braced himself for backlash. But instead, a murmur of conversation erupted, people glancing at each other, sharing incredulous expressions. Ruth stepped closer to him, her eyes searching his face. "That takes courage, Tom," she said, her voice softening. "But we need more than just words. We need actions that reflect this commitment." "I'm ready," Tom replied, sincerity etched on his features. "I want to host community events that promote understanding and diversity. I'll partner with Michael and others to ensure our town learns from this experience." The crowd began to buzz with conversation. A woman in the front, who had been part of the counter-protest, crossed her arms and frowned. "How do we know you're serious?" Tom took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment settle over him. "I know I can't erase the past, but I can do my best to shape a better future. I'm asking for your support, but I also recognize that trust needs to be rebuilt." Michael stepped forward, standing beside Tom, the crowd's eyes now shifting to him. "This is a pivotal moment for our community," he said, his voice filled with conviction. "We have a choice to make. Either we embrace change and understanding, or we cling to outdated beliefs that serve no one. Together, we can create a town that reflects the values of unity and acceptance." As Michael's words resonated through the crowd, a shift began to occur. Faces that had previously been hardened by anger and resentment started to soften. Conversations sparked, some individuals stepping forward to share their own experiences of hurt and exclusion, while others offered support for Tom's newfound commitment. For the first time, it felt as though a crack was forming in the walls that had long divided them. Tom felt a surge of emotion, a mixture of relief and gratitude as he witnessed the collective willingness to engage in dialogue. In the days that followed the rally, the transformation of Tom's Diner began. With Michael and Ruth's guidance, Tom started organizing events aimed at promoting understanding and acceptance. They held community discussions, inviting speakers from different backgrounds to share their experiences. They organized cultural celebrations, where people could showcase their heritage, and shared meals that encouraged the breaking of bread together. Tom worked tirelessly to foster an environment of inclusivity, actively seeking input from those in the community who had felt marginalized. But the journey was not without its challenges. Old habits die hard, and there were still those who resisted change, clinging to the beliefs that had shaped their lives for so long. At times, the opposition felt overwhelming, and doubt began to creep into Tom's mind. Would he really be able to transform the diner into a beacon of hope? Yet, as the weeks passed, Tom witnessed incredible resilience within the community. Families began to frequent the diner again, and for the first time in a long while, laughter echoed through its halls. People were willing to engage, to share stories, and to bridge the divides that had once seemed insurmountable. John Carter found his own voice within this growing movement. He became a leader among his peers, advocating for equality and acceptance in schools and within the town. He worked alongside his father, bringing in youth to participate in the discussions and events that transformed the diner into a community hub. Slowly but surely, the town began to shift. People started to come together, not just to confront the past, but to build a future that was brighter and more inclusive. Through the storm of emotions and the tumultuous journey, a newfound strength emerged within the community, a realization that they could shape their own narrative, one that honored diversity and inclusion while fostering understanding and compassion. As Tom looked around his diner one evening, he felt a sense of fulfillment wash over him. The walls that had once separated them were beginning to crumble, replaced by a foundation built on trust, dialogue, and hope. Little did they know, the ripple effects of their efforts would reach far beyond their town, inspiring other communities to confront their own prejudices and embrace the beauty of diversity. The seeds of change had been planted, and as they nurtured them together, the future glimmered with promise. Trials and tribulations. As the sun began to set over the town, casting golden hues across the streets, it seemed as though everything was finally falling into place. The diner buzzed with laughter and conversation as neighbors shared meals, exchanged stories, and forged new friendships. The once divided community was now coming together to celebrate their shared humanity. Yet, just as hope began to blossom, dark clouds loomed on the horizon. Word began to spread about an upcoming town hall meeting. The town council had called for a discussion on a new proposal that sought to address housing disparities in their community, an initiative aimed at creating affordable housing for everyone. While this initiative had the potential to further strengthen the ties within the community, it also sparked a heated debate that threatened to unravel the fragile progress they had made. Tom watched as the atmosphere in the diner began to shift. Although many patrons had initially embraced the idea of unity, conversations soon turned into arguments. The proposal drew lines in the sand, reigniting old fears and prejudices. Why should our tax dollars go toward helping people who don't belong here? He overheard one customer say, his voice tinged with anger. Michael and Ruth worked tirelessly to advocate for the proposal, stressing the importance of equity and opportunity for all. We have a chance to create a community where everyone can thrive, Michael argued passionately at the diner during one of their regular discussions. If we want to stand by our values of inclusivity, we can't ignore those who are struggling. But their voices were often drowned out by those who clung to the familiar rhetoric of exclusion. What about our kids? Another patron countered. We can't let our town be overrun by outsiders. John stood beside his father, grappling with the growing animosity. It was painful to see the community he had fought to unite begin to fracture once more. He realized the journey was far from over. It was a pivotal moment that would test their resolve. He rallied his friends, organizing discussions focused on bridging the divide and fostering understanding. At the same time, Tom felt a deep sense of responsibility weighing heavily on his shoulders. He had taken a stand and promised to make changes in his diner, but he now wondered how he could help steer the community towards a more constructive dialogue about the housing proposal. In the days leading up to the town hall meeting, tensions escalated. Supporters of the proposal organized peaceful demonstrations to express their views, while a countergroup emerged, branding themselves as the guardians of tradition. Their slogans echoed through the streets, painting an ominous picture of the divide that had reemerged. As the night of the town hall approached, anxiety hung thick in the air. Tom prepared for the meeting with the same determination that had driven him to confront his own prejudices. "This is our chance to show them what we've built," he told himself. "We can't let fear win." The town hall meeting unfolded with a palpable energy, the tension almost electric as residents filled the auditorium, many wearing their emotions on their sleeves. Tom took a seat at the back, flanked by John and a group of friends who had become staunch allies in the fight for inclusivity. As Michael spoke, a ripple of applause erupted, but it was met with a strong counter from the guardians of tradition. Their spokesperson, an older man named Frank, stepped forward, his face hardened by years of resentment. "This proposal will ruin our town," he shouted, his voice booming through the auditorium. "We don't need to accommodate those who threaten our way of life." A wave of murmurs surged through the crowd, and Tom felt his stomach knot. He glanced around, noting the uncertainty etched on the faces of his friends and supporters. It became clear that this was no longer just a debate about housing. It was a battle for the very soul of their community. The exchange grew increasingly heated as people shouted over one another. Some members of the audience stood to voice their opinions, emotions boiling to the surface. The once revered hall now resembled a battlefield, where words became weapons, and misunderstanding fueled animosity. Tom's heart raced as he watched the chaos unfold. The progress they had made felt precarious, hanging by a thread. He glanced at John, who met his eyes, a determined look in his gaze. They both knew they had to do something. "Let's go speak," John urged, his voice barely audible over the commotion. "We need to show them that we can talk without fighting." With a firm nod, Tom agreed. They moved to the front of the hall, feeling the weight of every eye upon them. As they stepped into the spotlight, the room felt eerily quiet, curiosity and tension mingling in the air. Tom cleared his throat, searching for the right words. "We're not here to argue," he began, his voice steady. "We're here to listen. We've all experienced fear and loss, but we have an opportunity to build something better. If we let this division take hold, we will lose the very essence of what it means to be a community." John took a deep breath, stepping forward to add his voice. "This town has a history of resilience," he said, his tone earnest. "We've seen what happens when we close ourselves off to change. Instead, let's embrace the idea that everyone deserves a place to call home." Their words resonated in the room, and for a moment, it felt as though a crack had formed in the walls of division. Some members of the Guardians began to lower their signs, and a few supporters of the housing initiative nodded in agreement. Encouraged, Tom continued, "Let's work together to ensure that our values reflect inclusivity and compassion. We can create a community where everyone thrives, regardless of their background. It won't be easy, but we must be willing to listen, to understand, and to grow together." A ripple of applause emerged, quiet yet steady, filling the auditorium with hope. It was a small victory, but it felt monumental amid the turmoil. Tom and John exchanged glances, a sense of purpose igniting within them. As the night continued, discussions blossomed. People began to share their own stories, of hardship, of hope, and of dreams for a united future. The tension that had once threatened to engulf the room began to ebb, replaced by a spirit of collaboration. Yet outside the town hall, the guardians of tradition were not silent. Their numbers grew, and they began to organize protests against the proposal. The once hopeful discussions were met with resentment and anger, and the town found itself at a crossroads. In the weeks that followed, the community found itself embroiled in a deeper struggle. Tom, John, Michael, and Ruth continued to fight for the housing initiative, but the backlash was fierce. Some of their neighbors turned against them, branding them as traitors to their community. "Why are you trying to change everything?" An angry patron shouted at Tom one evening in the diner. "You're ruining our town." Feeling the sting of his words, Tom took a deep breath, reminding himself of the promise he had made to create a space of inclusivity. "I'm not trying to change our town. I'm trying to help it grow," he replied, his voice calm yet firm. "We can't thrive if we leave anyone behind." As the conflict intensified, relationships became strained. Friends were pitted against friends, and the diner, a once beloved gathering place, became a battleground of ideals. Tom felt the weight of every interaction, his heart heavy with the realization that change was often met with resistance, even from those he once considered allies. Despite the hardships, a glimmer of hope remained. John organized youth-led discussions at school, where students shared their own visions of an inclusive future. As they gathered, laughter and creativity flourished, sparking a desire for change that echoed through the halls. They painted banners filled with messages of unity and hung them throughout the school, challenging their peers to engage in conversations that mattered. The town began to see flickers of transformation as young voices rose to the occasion, calling for empathy and understanding. It was a slow process, but one filled with determination. As the town hall meeting drew nearer, Tom, Michael, Ruth, and John knew they had to rally their supporters for one final push. They organized a community event to share the stories of those who would benefit from the housing initiative. Families struggling to find stable homes, individuals who had faced discrimination, and children yearning for safe places to grow. On the day of the event, the diner transformed into a vibrant space filled with art, music, and the aroma of home-cooked meals. Attendees listened intently as each speaker shared their journey, weaving a tapestry of shared experiences that illuminated the very heart of their community. Through laughter and tears, they broke down the barriers that had divided them, reminding each other of their common humanity. People began to understand that their fears were rooted in misunderstanding, and that real strength came from unity and compassion. As the sun set that day, the diner was filled with a sense of camaraderie and hope. The community had come together not just to listen, but to embrace the idea that change was not something to be feared, but an opportunity to learn and grow. And so, with renewed determination, they prepared for the upcoming town hall meeting, ready to stand together in support of a brighter future. They would face the challenges ahead, armed with the knowledge that their strength lay not in division, but in unity. A united stand. The night of the town hall meeting arrived, and the atmosphere was charged with anticipation. The auditorium was packed, a sea of faces reflecting a spectrum of emotions: hope, fear, determination, and resolve. As Tom took his seat alongside John, Michael, and Ruth, he felt a mixture of pride and apprehension. This was it. The culmination of their efforts to bridge the divide in their community was about to unfold. The meeting commenced with the mayor addressing the crowd, her voice calm yet commanding as she reminded everyone of the significance of open dialogue in a democratic society. "Tonight, we're not just discussing a proposal, we're discussing our future as a community," she declared, her gaze sweeping over the crowd. "I urge each of you to listen, to engage, and to remember that we all want what's best for our town." Tom exchanged a glance with John, who nodded in agreement. They both knew that what lay ahead was going to be challenging. The first speaker was Michael, who had been instrumental in rallying support for the housing initiative. As he approached the microphone, the room fell silent. He took a deep breath, letting the gravity of the moment wash over him. I stand before you not just as a proponent of this proposal, but as a member of this community who believes in our shared values of compassion and inclusivity," he began. "Our town has faced challenges before, but we've always risen to the occasion by coming together." He shared stories of families who struggled to find affordable housing, painting vivid pictures of their struggles and dreams. Every child deserves a safe place to grow up. Every family deserves the chance to thrive. He continued passionately. This proposal is not just about buildings. It's about the people who will call them home. It's about creating a community where everyone can flourish, regardless of their background. Applause erupted, but the echo of dissent was quick to follow. Frank, the spokesperson for the Guardians of Tradition, stepped forward, his expression a mixture of defiance and conviction. "We must not forget our roots. This town was built on hard work and sacrifice. Why should we compromise our values for those who don't belong here?" He countered, his voice rising above the crowd. The tension in the room thickened, and for a moment, it felt as though the progress they had made might come crashing down. Tom could see the worry etched on the faces of his friends and supporters. It was a stark reminder of the deep-seated fears that lingered beneath the surface of their community. As the back and forth continued, a young woman named Sarah, who had previously spoken at the community event, bravely took the stage. She was a recent college graduate and had returned home to help her family after facing the daunting reality of student loans and housing costs. "I'm here to speak on behalf of my generation," she began, her voice steadied despite the tension. "We want to stay here, to contribute to our community, but we need affordable housing to do that. This isn't about outsiders. It's about making our town livable for everyone." Her words resonated, and a wave of applause followed, but it was quickly drowned out by Frank's supporters, who shouted in opposition. The auditorium felt like a pressure cooker, emotions bubbling to the surface as people grappled with the idea of change. With each speaker, the divide between the two sides seemed to widen. Tom's heart raced as he realized how deeply ingrained these fears were. The stakes were high, and the path forward seemed uncertain. The fight for their vision of a united community had taken on an urgency that left him feeling both empowered and vulnerable. As the meeting continued, Tom saw the need for a unified voice. He turned to John and Michael. "We need to remind everyone why we're here, why this matters. Let's share our stories. Show them the faces behind the proposal," he urged, his eyes alight with determination. As the evening progressed, more voices emerged in favor of the initiative. Ruth shared her experiences as a teacher, emphasizing the impact that housing instability had on children's education. "We need to break this cycle," she implored. "A stable home can make all the difference in a child's life. We're not just talking about houses, we're talking about futures." The crowd began to shift, as some attendees who had previously sided with the Guardians of Tradition started to reconsider their stance. The combination of heartfelt stories and facts about the growing housing crisis created a palpable shift in the atmosphere. People began to look around at one another, engaging in whispered conversations, grappling with their perspectives. Then came a pivotal moment. A respected elder of the community, Mrs. Thompson, stood up, her voice quivering with age and wisdom. "I've seen this town through thick and thin," she began, her eyes scanning the audience. "I remember when we were all newcomers at some point, trying to find our place. We must open our hearts and minds. We owe it to our children and to those who come after us to create a community that welcomes everyone." The room fell silent, absorbing her words. The weight of her statement hung in the air, a reminder of the values that had once united them as a community. Tom felt a surge of hope, sensing a shift that could transcend the current divisions. As the meeting continued, more individuals stepped forward to share their stories. Each tale added another layer to the tapestry they were weaving. Stories of resilience, compassion, and the shared human experience that tied them all together. Finally, it was Tom's turn. Taking a deep breath, he walked to the front, the memories of his own journey swirling in his mind. He recalled the faces of those who had walked through his diner, each one with their own story, their own dreams. I spent years in this diner, listening to the hopes and fears of our community. He began, his voice steady yet filled with emotion. What I've learned is that we are all connected. When one of us struggles, we all struggle. When one of us rises, we all rise. This isn't about who belongs or doesn't. It's about who we choose to be as a community. His words struck a chord, and the audience began to lean in, drawn by the sincerity of his message. We have the power to choose unity over division, to create a place where every voice matters, where every person feels valued. The time for fear is over. It's time for courage, for understanding, and for love. The room erupted into applause, a chorus of voices rising in support. People stood together, reaching across the aisles that had divided them, shaking hands and embracing. Tom felt a wave of relief wash over him as he realized that they were beginning to see one another as more than just labels. They were recognizing their shared humanity. As the meeting drew to a close, the mayor returned to the podium, a sense of optimism radiating from her. Tonight, we have witnessed the power of dialogue and the strength of our community, she declared. It's clear that we have work to do, but together, we can build a brighter future. With the culmination of the evening's discussions, the community voted on the housing proposal. Cheers erupted as the results were announced, overwhelming support for the initiative. It was a significant victory, but the true win lay in the bridges built that night, the connections made, and the understanding that had begun to take root. As the crowd began to disperse, Tom, John, Michael, and Ruth gathered outside the auditorium, exhilarated by the energy of the moment. The future was still uncertain, but they had taken a monumental step forward. They had transformed fear into understanding, division into unity. "I can't believe we did it," John exclaimed, a wide grin stretching across his face. "This is just the beginning, isn't it?" Tom nodded, feeling a sense of purpose swell within him. "Yes, but we can't stop here. We need to continue this dialogue, keep these connections alive." As they stood together, watching the stars emerge in the night sky, they knew that they had ignited a spark of change that could illuminate their community for generations to come. The dawn of a new era. The weeks following the town hall meeting transformed the fabric of the community. The approval of the housing proposal was not merely a legal victory, it marked a significant cultural shift. The residents, once divided by fear and misunderstanding, began to engage in open conversations, striving to understand one another and the diverse needs of their town. Tom, John, Michael, and Ruth emerged as leaders in this movement for change. They organized community forums, inviting residents from all walks of life to share their thoughts and experiences. Each event drew larger crowds, with newcomers eager to participate in discussions that had previously felt taboo. The tone of these gatherings was markedly different. There was a palpable sense of collaboration and willingness to listen. One evening, during a community potluck organized by Ruth, laughter and the aroma of home-cooked meals filled the air as neighbors mingled freely. Tom observed a striking scene: a single mother sharing a table with an elderly couple, their children laughing as they played games nearby. This image, simple yet profound, was a testament to the community's newfound unity. "Isn't it incredible?" John remarked, joining Tom at the refreshment table, his eyes gleaming with excitement. "Just a few months ago, we couldn't even talk to each other without it ending in conflict." Tom nodded, his heart swelling with pride. It's more than just the housing project. It's about redefining what it means to be part of this community. As the nights turned into weeks, Tom noticed a shift not just in the people but in the very essence of the town. Neighbors began to care for one another, checking in on those who had faced hardships. Local businesses began to collaborate, organizing events that brought residents together. Farmers markets, art fairs, and cultural festivals celebrating the diversity of the community. However, the road to change was not without its challenges. There were still remnants of resistance, lingering fears that some residents struggled to shake off. The guardians of tradition did not fade quietly into the background. Frank and his supporters remained vocal, organizing counter-events and rallies that aimed to maintain the old ways. Tensions occasionally flared, reminding everyone that the journey towards understanding was ongoing. One evening, as Tom closed the diner, he noticed a familiar figure standing outside. Frank. Hesitant but resolute, Tom approached him. "Hey, Frank, what brings you here?" Frank crossed his arms, his expression a mix of determination and vulnerability. "I'm here to talk. I don't want this to be another us versus them situation. I've been thinking about everything that's happened." Surprised by Frank's openness, Tom nodded. "I think that's a step in the right direction. Let's talk." They found a quiet corner, and for the first time, they engaged in a genuine conversation. Frank spoke of his fears, rooted in a deep sense of loyalty to his family's legacy in the town. "I just don't want us to lose what made this place special," he admitted, his voice softening. "I've seen so many changes, and it scares me." Tom listened intently, understanding that Frank's resistance came from a place of love for his community. "Change can be daunting, I get that," he replied thoughtfully. "But what we're building doesn't erase the past. It honors it. We're adding layers to what makes our town unique." By the end of the conversation, they had established an uneasy truce, a tentative understanding that perhaps collaboration could be the bridge between their differing views. Frank agreed to attend the next community forum, a small yet significant step toward healing the rift. As autumn painted the town in hues of orange and gold, the housing project began to take shape. The groundbreaking ceremony was met with excitement and hope. Local volunteers, led by Michael, rallied together to lay the foundation, their efforts symbolic of the unity they had fought so hard to achieve. During one of these weekends, Tom joined a group of neighbors at the construction site. As they worked side by side, laughter and camaraderie filled the air. The old diner served as a makeshift headquarters, providing food and refreshments to the laborers, further solidifying its role as a community hub. Amidst the flurry of activity, Tom spotted Frank. He was chatting with a group of volunteers, sharing stories, and even helping to mix cement. The sight warmed Tom's heart. It was a tangible sign that walls were crumbling and barriers were being dismantled. As the project progressed, Tom realized that the heart of the community was not just in the buildings being constructed, but in the relationships being forged. People began to see beyond their initial fears, recognizing the shared humanity that connected them all. One evening, during a community dinner celebrating the halfway mark of the housing project, Tom took a moment to reflect on the transformation that had taken place. He stood up to address the crowd, the warm glow of string lights illuminating the faces of his friends and neighbors. "Look around," he began, his voice steady. "What we've built here goes beyond bricks and mortar. We've built a foundation of trust, compassion, and understanding. This project isn't just about providing homes. It's about creating a community where every voice is heard and valued." The room erupted in applause, a chorus of agreement and support that resonated deeply. Tom felt a surge of gratitude wash over him, recognizing that this was more than a project. It was a movement. But the celebration was not merely a conclusion, it was a new beginning. As the housing units neared completion, the team organized a series of community workshops aimed at ensuring that the new residents felt welcomed and integrated into the fabric of the town. They invited local artists to share their crafts, local musicians to entertain, and community leaders to provide resources and information. On the day of the grand opening, the atmosphere was electric. Residents flocked to the site, eager to see the results of their hard work. The new homes stood proudly, a testament to the collective effort that had unfolded over the months. As Tom welcomed guests and introduced the new residents, he felt a deep sense of fulfillment. But the true heart of the event was revealed when the new family stepped forward to share their stories. Each narrative highlighted the dreams and aspirations they carried, their hopes for a brighter future. It was a powerful reminder that they were not just filling homes, but creating a vibrant community where every individual mattered. As the sun began to set, Casting a warm glow over the festivities, Tom stepped outside to catch his breath. He leaned against the railing, taking in the scene before him. The laughter, the conversations, the connections being forged. Suddenly, he felt a presence beside him. It was Frank, a soft smile on his face. "You know, I was wrong," he admitted. "I thought we were losing our community. But what I see now, it's a new chapter, a better one." Tom grinned, feeling the weight of the past lift from his shoulders. It's not about losing anything. It's about growing. We're creating a space where everyone can belong. As the stars twinkled above them, Tom realized that the journey was far from over. The community would face challenges ahead, but they were equipped with newfound strength and understanding. They had proven that dialogue could break down barriers and that empathy could forge lasting connections. The next morning, the diner buzzed with activity as Tom prepared for another day. He looked out the window at the rising sun, its golden rays spilling over the town. In that moment, he understood that the heart of a community beats strongest when it embraces change and nurtures relationships. Tom turned back to the kitchen, filled with a renewed sense of purpose. He was not just serving food. He was serving a vision of hope, resilience, and unity. And in that diner, surrounded by friends and family, he knew they were on the brink of something extraordinary. The story of their community was still being written, and together they would craft a narrative that would inspire generations to come.